Hi there, welcome to a new video from Floating in Books. I have a wrap up for you of all the books I read in the first half of 2022. So let's get to it. Welcome to everybody watching, thank you so very much for being here. Today's video is going to be all about the books I've read from January till June of 2022. So I fell behind greatly on just reading in general, and this year I definitely picked up the pace a little bit compared to 2021. That year I just read like 11 books, and this year I've read about 24 by now. There are a couple of them I did finish later than the time bracket I've used to sort of talk about some books in this video. And one of the reasons why I was able to read a lot more is because I got a little bit more into audiobooks. So there's quite a few audiobooks that I need to share with you. Plus there are books that I've read that I don't have because they were lent to me by my mom. So that's why I have a good stack here of things that I finished this year that I'm going to talk you through first. Then I'll do the audiobooks and the things I was reading when I was at my mom's place. I don't really have an order here though. There's no particular order, but every year in the springtime we have Dutch Book Week here, and then you get a free book if you buy a Dutch book. And I bought, well, this one I bought and this one I got as a free gift with purchase. This is by a Dutch author. They write a short story every single year that you can get for free. Monterosso, Amour by Ilja, Leonard, Pfeiffer. And this is a short story about a lady who is sort of fed up with life and decides to go to Italy on vacation by herself. And then the pandemic starts and she's stuck in Italy, and then she has these adventures, and there's this boy who she starts helping out. He lives with his, was it? Like everything seems to like somehow be connected in the end, even though she's in a completely different country. That's sort of like the takeaway here. It was a pretty endearing story. I quite enjoyed it. And it was a good short story to give a read. And then the other one, that was one you could purchase. So another Dutch author will usually write like some sort of essay. And this is another short story collection, Het Warmtefort by Marieke Rijneveld. And every story in this book is about like primary school. That's where it comes from. The title refers to the school as this like place of comfort that you can always go to. And it's very much sort of like autobiographical elements and things like that. It was good. Like not every story in here appealed to me as much, but you know, it's a short read. It was quick and easy, and it was actually a pretty good one. And then we have some more Dutch books because I thought I could get those out of the way. The Zeven Vinkjes by Joris Luyendijk. This book has been hyped up quite a bit in the Dutch media, which is why I bought it. I read an interview with the author in my newspaper, and then I was like, oh, I might want to read that. So what this book is about is him sort of finding out that he ticks all the boxes, and there are 7 boxes that you can tick. Zeven Vinkjes means 7 ticked boxes. And the boxes that you need to tick is male, white, highly educated, and there's a couple of other things. And he has found out that he has that privilege. So this is a book about privilege, written from someone who has privilege, by someone who has privilege, who has figured out that, you know, he has privilege and is now trying to educate people who are also privileged. And it's really funny because he writes some anecdotes of, you know, him going and talking about these things in companies. And then all of a sudden, all of the people who have the privilege start to, you know, agreeing with him, even though they already have diversity officers in the company who have been saying the same thing for years, but nobody listens to them. So I think it's an important book from that perspective, because he's sort of like the in crowd. So he can hopefully get some more people on board. But a lot of people have also criticized his book for saying that, you know, it's just like, really, it took you this long to figure it out? So I do think though that it's an important one, because you get that perspective of someone who does have the privilege figuring out that he is privileged and how he came about that. So I thought there were a couple of really good anecdotes in here. The science behind it is a bit wishy-washy, I have to say, but I think it's an important one that if you are a man and you're white, you tick all the boxes, you could say, but also if you come from a less privileged background, then it's definitely a good one as well to see just how someone's thinking process is. Because he kind of takes the approach of, oh, I didn't know about this, and oh, this is what I'm experiencing, and then he starts to try and figure out what it is that he's experiencing. That's sort of his approach. I've read 2 other books by him. In fact, one of the audiobooks I'm going to tell you about is also by this author. So yeah, I think he came to an insight and he wrote a book about it, and it's gotten a lot of attention. And I think that that's sort of also why a lot of people took issue with it, because why is this suddenly getting attention even though people have been telling about these things for years? So yeah, that was an enjoyable one. That was non-fiction. And then I also read Lale Gül, Ga Leven. So this was the Dutch book I bought to get the free book as well. So because you do need to buy a Dutch book if you want to get the free book, which is a clever ploy to sell more books, of course. But yeah, this is about a Turkish-Dutch conservative family, and the girl grows up in this family and all of the rules and what she has to do, and going to like schools on Saturday and getting like the religion is very much part of everyday life and how that plays out. And she starts to rebel against it in her own way and in her own time. And she, you know, is starting to wear makeup, which she can't do. And she has a Dutch boyfriend at a certain point in time. And the author has also gotten a lot of death threats because, again, it has a very strong biographical element to this. This was good. I mean, I think, again, it's just an important story to read a story of someone coming from a background like that, which is very far set away from my own sort of worldview. So that's why I thought that was interesting about it. But I thought the writing style felt a little unedited at times. So in terms of, you know, it being quick paced and stuff, it was very readable. But in terms of, you know, it being like really elegant prose, I felt it was a little blunt at times, so I didn't love it for that. So it was a good read. I think I read it in about a day, so I liked it for that, but it wasn't 5 stars. I haven't had a lot of 5-star reads this year. Like everything was like okay or good, so it was like 3, maybe 4 stars, but nothing that blew my socks off so far. And then for physical copies, I finally finished Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This is a book I picked up because a lot of my students were reading it and were saying that it was a good book. And as an English teacher, I also have to know what my students are reading, of course. So that's why I decided to pick it up. And this was the first book I finished in the year. And it had been on my like TBR, as in I started the book, but I hadn't finished reading it for almost 6 months, if not 6 months on the dot. I started reading this over the summertime 2021. So this book kind of, you know, caused the reading slump, you could say. And I figured out as I was finishing this that it wasn't because it was a bad book or anything like that. I quite enjoyed it. I like this sort of historical perspective. Nature is a really big element in the book as well. So I really love the descriptions that we get of the marshes, and the main character was also pretty savvy. I just thought, I should have put this. There were some elements to the book that were almost too clever. So that's what kind of put me off in the end. But I read this at a point in time where I wasn't doing the greatest. So my mental health wasn't that good. So I actually cried buckets as I was reading this. So I think my emotional state at that moment had also greatly impacted my opinion of the book. I thought it was quite a harrowing tale because of that. And yeah, I like I said, it's just all a little bit too clever in the end, the way everything comes together. It's a bit too neatly wrapped up. I'd like the character just to be a little bit more flawed and yeah, have that. And that was sort of missing, I felt. But in terms of like historical perspective on like racial issues and divides between people and social classes, I thought it brought that to the forefront, and I thought it did that very well. We'll get to the fantasy books in a minute, but I also read just something for fun. A friend of mine recommended this to me. This is Richard Osman's The Thursday Murder Club, and this book is about a group of senior citizens who have since retired, and they live in a retirement village, and every Thursday they come together and try to solve a cold case because one of them is a retired police constable. But then something actually happens and a real murder happens, and then these old people try to solve it. Or like a dead body is found on their compound somewhere because there are new renovations, and it's like the politics of like the management of their retirement home and their interactions and banter, and then it's also like them interacting with other locals in the town that the retirement home is located. This is, if you like British witty humor, you're gonna love this. This was a very easy read, and it's just, it was very enjoyable. It's now a series, and I'm like, do I need to read more? I don't feel like it. This was fun. It was an easy, like, uplifting book. It was very endearing. You get old people like complaining about their joints hurting and being forgetful and all that, and nobody thinks they can do it, but of course they end up solving the murder. So it's quite endearing, very well warming in that sense, but it's got a pretty dark twist as well. So it's got a little bit of everything, and I just felt it had, you know, humor in the right places, emotion in the right places, and that's, you know, it was very enjoyable to read as well, but again, nothing that blew my socks off. And I finally finished it. Natasha Denona. I talk about makeup way too often. But I finally finished The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. So this is the third book in the Broken Earth trilogy, and I read the first two books in 2021, and it kind of caused the reading slump more so than the Delia Owens book. I mean, when I started reading Delia Owens, I stopped reading altogether for months at a time. But it was this and my reading it during a pandemic that really caused the reading slump. All of a sudden I was like, no, it was just too bleak, too harrowing, and I just couldn't deal with it. In the end, I felt that the third installment probably isn't my favorite. I think I like the first book the best. In the third book, it's again like one of those things where authors just try to wrap everything up, and I would have liked there to be a few other sort of strings that, you know, are left behind. I would have preferred that, but I liked how it came together in the end. In the first two books, especially in the first one, I had to get used to the fact that we get some shifting perspectives. That was unusual and different, and I felt it always made me feel a little distant to like the characters that are written about. I couldn't get into their heads as well as I normally can. So for me, that also knocked it down a point for like how much I was able to engage with the story, and therefore how many stars I would rate this. It's a really good, innovative fantasy series for sure. I can see why people like it. I can see why this has won prizes. It's just not my all-time favorite fantasy series. Something that I really enjoyed was this, The Library of the Dead by T.L. Huchu. And this, I hope I pronounced that correctly, by the way. So this is a book that is set in Edinburgh, but it's a very dystopian sort of Ready Player One vibe. So something happened, and in this book it's not entirely explained what has happened, but one day, like, there are no cars anymore, everybody needs to walk everywhere. There are like good parts of town, not so great parts of town. And the main character is a girl who is like teenager, she's a teenager age, but she's quite wise for how old she is. She's very street smart, and to earn an extra bit of cash, because she's no longer in school, she gives services to the dead, to relay messages to their loved ones, because she can talk to them. And it's like this, I believe it's Zimbabwe, sort of like magic that's involved, and her grandmother who she lives with could do all these things, and she's sort of also able to walk in the land of the dead. And one of the dead comes up to her and says, "My boy is missing, I don't know where he is." And then she goes and solves his missing person case and what's going on there. It feels kind of YA at first, also because of the typeset and the fact that the main character is a teenager, but the themes in the story are definitely a little bit more adult and a little bit more grown up. I mean, the things that end up happening in the story are not something that you usually will read about in a YA story. So that's why I definitely feel it fits more into the adult fantasy realm. And this is a book series. I believe the second book has just come out, and I'll definitely be picking it up because I want to read more from this perspective. This character is awesome. She is flawed and she knows it, and she doesn't apologize for it, and she really knows her own mind, and I really like that about it as well. So this is a great new series that I have discovered, and I definitely want to read more from it. And then we have Ben Aaronovich's Amongst Our Weapons. So this is a, I don't know how many books are out in this series, but the Peter Grant Rivers of London series. The first book in the series is called Rivers of London, in case you need to know where to start. I've read every single book in this realm, save for the graphic novels. I've read all the short stories, all the novellas, and this was the latest book that came out in March. These are really quick, action-paced, urban fantasy stories. In the first book, we meet our main character, Peter Grant, who has just graduated police school and he's now a police constable in London. And he figures out on his very first job that he can detect and do magic. So it's sort of like Harry Potter meets Luther meets Sherlock Holmes in a modern day setting. I really enjoy that. Every book is set in a different part of London. This is set in like the underground diamond exchange that is there. There's one that's set in Elephant and Castle. There's one that's set in Soho. So every single time a different area in London is sort of like part of the story. I think there's only one really that is set in, I think, Hertfordshire? I don't know, somewhere in like the countryside. So that's not actually in London itself. This has a great cast of characters. The books have been critiqued for being quite sort of male heavy, especially the first ones. I personally don't always mind that. I mean, I just read the book for the plot mostly. And I don't always care about representation, but I feel the author has sort of made amends towards these later novels, and female characters are written in that are just a lot stronger and they really sort of bounce off the page. His banter with one of his like colleagues is really great. And also him and his, I think, is she his wife? Fiance, partner, who is having also a baby in this book, is also hilarious. And she is also one of the river goddesses that London has, which you're introduced to in the first book. So I really like the cast of characters we get here. It's overall just really engaging, really action-packed, and super fast-paced, and that's why I like these. If you love urban fantasy and you've never read any of these, you love London, you love detectives, and you love a bit of fantasy, then definitely check these out. So then there were two books that I read as I was staying at my parents' place because I renovated my house in June. So I had no bathroom and no kitchen for like 2-3 weeks. So I stayed at my parents' as much as I could. And I bought my mom a book for her birthday, which is a Dutch book, Wat je van bloed weet, by Philip Huff. And this book is about child abuse. So it was, you know, or like more like domestic abuse, child abuse, like as a result of domestic abuse. So it was quite a dark tale, very much a trigger warning here. It was a pretty good read, but it uses a you perspective, which again, I think is done to just put some distance between you and the characters in the book. But it just felt a little weird at times, like because the author was so consistent using this you perspective, the way the narrative ran just not always felt very fluid, and it felt a bit choppy at times. It had a lot of really short sentences. So again, it was a book I read, I think in a single morning. I actually finished it on the way to my home as I was going home. So it was one that I read very quickly, and it just, again, I wouldn't say I enjoyed it because it's not an enjoyable story, but it's definitely one that's important to read about, I guess. And it's again very much heavily based in his autobiographical experiences that he grew up with. So there's definitely a lot there. Yeah, I've been reading some more Dutch books again, which I think is good. And then I also read a non-fiction book, Mocro, Maffia, by Wouter, Laumans and Marijn, Schrijver. So in case you don't know what this is about, in recent years there have been some high-profile criminal cases in the Netherlands revolving around what is known as the Mocro Maffia, Mocro being an abbreviation, an acronym for Moroccan. So very often the people who are part of this group tend to be of Moroccan descent, not all the time because there's a lot of people from different backgrounds involved in the story. And this is written by two journalists who have sort of recounted the events that have led up to some assassinations that happened a couple of years ago. The first half of the book was really good, well researched, and everything was there. And then like the final part of the book just felt very sort of hurriedly done and very just like very sloppy. Like the lines started to become very, very difficult to follow, as if they're like the first half to 2/3 of the book had been edited and the last bit just hadn't. So that's why I ended up giving this just 2 stars, because it wasn't something that I truly thought was, you know, yeah. And I just picked this up randomly. I was like staying at my parents' place and the bookcase is in the room I stay in, so I just was browsing it that night and I was like, oh, I might as well read this. So I kind of picked it up. So yeah, that was a 2-star read for me. And then some audiobooks that I read. So one of them was about Victorian London. This is by Liza Picard. And this was good. It's just like historical Victorian London, just the history of it. And it went into like different topics about the era of the time. I always love learning more about Victorian London. So this was okay, and the reading pace was pretty okay. The thing is that the audiobook had definitely been produced in the CD era. So in the audio track, as I was listening, now please put in disc 5. And I'm like, oh, really? So this was an old one that they've just like put on an app, and that was it. So that was a bit of a shame. And then I think one of my favorite books I've read, even though I didn't give it a lot of stars, but I think it's again an important topic to know more about, is Zo hadden we het niet bedoeld by Jesse Frederik. And this is a book from The Correspondent, and they've done some research into a recent political scandal here in the Netherlands about some people who were accused of being fraudulent with some of their like tax returns, like how should I say it, for like child daycare sort of thing. And it's pretty much come down to the fact that the Dutch politics was so hung up on making sure that nobody could be fraudulent with it, that they actually created all these cases. And this book details in minute detail how it all went down. And this book is therefore a 3-star read for me, because sometimes the endless amount of minutes spent reading out documentation I felt was a bit much. It was like, you can also just say this and you don't have to go over the exact email and just, take a couple of quotes from it. But sometimes it was like just pages of him reading out like political documents. So that got very boring very quickly. But yeah, it's again really, well, cool that they were able to figure out how it exactly went down, what happened. And yeah, this is something that the Dutch politics still hasn't recovered from, because now they seem to be going in the opposite direction. Then we have Dit kan niet waar zijn, which is also by Joris Luyendijk, the author I just showed you the Zeven Vinkjes book from. And this book is about the financial crisis in the city of London, and how the city sort of was part of the financial system collapsing in 2008. So he's interviewed a lot of people who told him about, how it all worked and what they were doing, what their roles are, and how the financial world works if you work in it. So again, really interesting read from that perspective. Was it really good? No. Like with the Zeven Vinkjes book, I felt that the anecdotes, the personal stories were the best parts, but it's not necessarily something that I felt was overly well researched and really sort of, I don't know. It just could have been a little bit more in depth. That's what I'm trying to say. Then I also read Ruth Goodman's How to Behave Badly in Elizabethan England. So this was again a non-fiction audiobook that I listened to. Ruth Goodman is also behind some BBC television series about historical eras in England, and this was really fun because it was about swear words that were popular around Shakespeare's time, and like bad habits that people were having, and hygiene and crime and punishment. So it was all about the bad stuff. So it was really fun because of that. Again, a 3-star read for me, because again, I love listening to nonfiction history audiobooks. I really, really do. But they are very often, if they are written by actual historians, they are so detailed, and sometimes I just get lost in the detail if I'm listening to it. If I were to read it on a page, I would usually skip that. So, not gonna lie. And then this isn't an audiobook, but because I don't have the physical copy, because I've lent it to someone, I always forget to talk about it. But Joshua's Woolrich, Food Isn't Medicine, I also read. And this I gave 4 stars. This is a book sort of like in the health at every size kind of realm of reading. So the book is very much about how very often the first advice someone will get if they want to improve their health is to just lose weight. However, a lot of research has shown that weight isn't everything, and that you can be fit in a bigger body, and that, being skinny isn't equal to being healthy. And he sort of lays it all down and goes through it. He's a doctor, I think like a family physician in the UK, and he's currently doing a master's in nutrition. So he's trying to figure out a lot of things. And he does say that, you know, food is important and what we eat is important, but we also shouldn't forget that medicine is there, and that, you know, ultimately a doctor's job is to try and get people to be better no matter what health concerns they might have. And that it's all about listening to your patients and really, you know, listening to what they have going on. So again, yeah, it was pretty good. He's got some resources in the back that has led me to now want to read some more books on the topic, but I can't really find them as audiobooks, and I do prefer to read nonfiction as audiobooks. This I read as a physical copy. And then I also listened to another correspondent book. This is Sanne Blauw's Het beste boek verkocht ooit, met deze titel. So this is a book all about numbers, and especially numbers and how they are used in the press. So statistics, and how, you know, combining statistics in the wrong way is going to skew, you know, the way we view the world. And that's why the book is called This is the Best Sold, the Most Sold Book Ever, with this title. So to sort of like do it there. But yeah, it sort of makes you see how a lot of decisions, even like really important ones, are made with half the information. And yeah, so that one I did give 4 stars because it wasn't that long, and it didn't go into very many details, but it very much also pointed out like where things went wrong in like the early stages of the pandemic, and people like citing wrong sources. And it's really about that, but also how numbers can be used to an advantage, but also can be like just combined in the exact same numbers can be used in a different way, and you get a completely different result. And then I also read Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, We Should All Be Feminists, which I gave 4 stars. This is a really short one, and I had never read it, and I felt a bit bad about it, and I think she makes some really good points in this, so I would definitely recommend. And then I also read Judith Flanders, A Place for Everything, and this is about sort of like listicles and alphabets and like how we organize things. So the premise was really interesting to me, but it ended up being, like with the Ruth Goodwin book, a little bit too detailed for my liking on this topic. Like after a couple of chapters, you're like, yeah, okay, I get it. This is how it works, because it's like the same premise every single time. So that's why for me, it was a 3-star read. And I think that's everything I've read so far in 2022. I have read other things since then, but I want to do a roundup of the things I read in the summertime, sometime in like October. So then I'll tell you about what I read in July, August, and September. So I'll do that wrap up in October, and then I hope to be able to do them monthly again from like November onwards. So I just have some catching up to do, so I really hope you enjoyed today's video. Thank you so very much for joining me. Please give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more by me. I come on here once a week, so like stay tuned for more, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye!